about crime in our communities in Derby, Derbyshire and East Staffordshire all this week. And today we're focusing on knife crime. Now, we found that knife crime in young people in Derbyshire is up 56% on what it was 5 years ago. In Burton, the number of knife incidents so far this year is already double the total of last year. Rob Freckleton's son Oliver was stabbed to death in Burton last year, one day before his 20th birthday.
Well, it was the day before his 20th birthday, and he hadn't been out for ages, and his girlfriend said to him, "Go on, just go out tonight." So he went out with some friends. They ended up going to this party, and then we got a phone call to say that something had happened. I had COVID at the time, and I was still in a bit of shock. My wife and my son went to where it was, and when they turned up, there was armed police, ambulances, and they actually witnessed the paramedics trying to resuscitate Oliver. I can't put it into words. It's destroyed us. Even now, once a week, I have trauma therapy. My wife has trauma therapy. We're both suffering from PTSD. And I spoke to my son, because he went as well. My son witnessed all this. That's my other son. He's 17. And to say, "Dad, I think they're resuscitating him." And then to get the call off my wife to say, "He's dead."
Well, listening to that is Danny Mondesir, who's a youth educator for Street Whyze in Burton. Danny, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. You know firsthand the impact of knife crime on families, and in fact, you've been supporting Rob and the family, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Basically, having done like loads of work in the West Midlands over the last few years, by being a Burton resident myself, I decided to set up a project called Street Whyze Project in Burton, because I was seeing a rise in knife crime, and obviously the incident with Oliver Freckleton, it prompted me to think I need to set something up in Burton. There's nothing happening. There are no coordinated interventions, and somebody needs to do something. And through that, I met obviously Rob and Christy Freckleton, and I've been trying to support them through this traumatic time. It's hard to, you can't even really put it into words, can you?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's hard to listen to, isn't it?
Yeah.
You say about there's no kind of coordinated intervention, there's no work being done. By that, I guess you mean to hopefully stop something like Oliver's death happening.
I think it's the whole spectrum of things that come into play when we talk about a coordinated approach. There's obviously an issue. I've listened to Ben Adams, and he's said it's a complicated issue, which it is. There's a policing issue, resource issue, but I think this brings to light a number of things that need to be addressed, and also the massive issue as well is the awareness and the education for young people around the consequences, the potential consequences. It's right in our face. The knife crime statistics have doubled. People are dying. So the awareness and education, which is needed, needs to be rolled out properly. It needs to be coordinated properly. It needs to be the right interventions. It needs to be the right approaches used. And I think this is where historically there have been issues, and why we're sort of coming to this point where we need to quickly.
Okay, well, I mean, you've mentioned about Ben Adams from Derbyshire Police. Let's have a listen what Ben's had to say.
It's a complicated world, knife crime. A third of it is domestic related, so it's in the household. But I think most people are very nervous about young people feeling they need to carry a knife for protection, and then finding themselves in the worst possible situation. And there's been some tragic incidents in Burton as well.
I mean, how do we stop that, Danny? I mean, I grew up in a generation when that, or maybe that was due just due to where I grew up. Although, I mean, to be fair, there was a good mix. You know, there were your rough areas. It's a town that had poverty as well. But knives being carried around wasn't a thing. Just was not a thing. So how do we stop that? Why is that happening now?
I think it's there's almost a culture, an urban culture that's come into play, whereby there's sort of things that contribute to it. It could be issues around drugs. It could be issues around areas and territory. It could be just people going to the wrong places at the wrong time. So I think there's loads of different things that contribute to the issue. But then I think there's also, when you flip it on the other side, do people feel safe? Do people feel that there's a presence from the police? Do they feel reassured that the authorities are protecting them? And when you don't, you take things into your own hands, don't you? If you can't rely on somebody else to look after you, you'll try to look after yourself. I think, unfortunately, for whatever reason, people are not feeling safe on the streets, and that includes our young people. And I think, just the increase in crime and the way that even the justice system is operating, I think there's a lot to look at. It's more than a day's conversation. It's a whole plethora of work that needs to be done, all the way from education and sort of trying to steer young people out of that mindset that they're going into now, and also all the way to the other side of the spectrum, and looking at justice and the consequences, which unfortunately young people openly say they're not a deterrent.
Wow. So the consequences of their actions are not seen as enough to change their way.
You can speak to young people, especially young people that may be on the cusp of, becoming involved in criminal activity, and a standard response when you're working in this field is that, well, nothing's going to happen anyway. So, do you know what I mean? I'm going to get away with it at least a couple of times. And this is the types of responses that I get as somebody going into schools, colleges, educational establishments, speaking to young people. They're just not, deterred by what's in place at the moment.
So, I mean, what you're doing, trying to educate, I guess what you want to see is more of that happening, a bigger rollout, much wider, much broader than what you're able to achieve just in Burton, but also maybe kind of slamming down on what the consequences could be.
Oh, definitely. That's a big part of the education. It's about, actions and consequences. It definitely needs to be rolled out, in a much bigger capacity than it is now. I think there's a lot of barriers that prevent this from happening and have prevented it from happening in the past. And I think, again, this is where the authorities need to listen, learn, but take action. I think there's been a lot of conversations, and it's not just Staffordshire, it's not just Derbyshire. I think this is more or less like probably a national issue, and I think you can have meetings and talk and put together strategies and everything, but people are dying, and I think the action needs to be taken now. And myself as a third sector organisation, the barriers that I come across in order to provide my services and my help to educational establishments it's really difficult. And I think the barriers need to be removed very quickly, because I'm concerned, especially we've just started the 6 weeks holidays for that something significant can happen in that time. And I really wish that I'd had the opportunity to do a lot more work before the 6 week, the holidays. So, yeah, it's a difficult one.
Danny, great to get your thoughts. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. That's Danny Mondiseur, who's a youth educator for Street Whyze in Burton.
Hey, it's a mess.